Hello students, this is Dr. John R. Tillman again. This is the last video lecture of the summer course. This ties into week 7, which deals with decolonization of Africa and Asia in the Cold War. But this lecture specifically deals with Central Africa. Now, you all have supposed to watch the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba is very important in terms of decolonization and Central Africa, because his assassination leads to major wars and Central Africa against European nations. And what it does, it also leads to one of the reasons why Central Africa looked the way it does. And there has to be a historical interpretation we put on that. Any of you who watch the film Beast of No Nation, which I feel everyone should watch, there's a reason why. Let's go into a historical analysis of why those events are currently happening, or one of the reasons why those events are currently happening. As you see, there's a picture of Patrice Lumumba. If you look at the cursor, this already hits Fidel Castro. And the title of this lecture is called Angola and the Cold War in Central Africa. Okay. Now, to understand Africa and Angola, you have to understand the Cold War. And the Cold War is this: World War II is over. Western Europe can no longer colonize Africa or Asia. They doesn't have the funds to do. At some point, they have to give it its independence, or you create what's called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which is the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, and put Africa and other nations in debt, which they have been doing for years. One nation. So, but the Cold War is this: the global struggle for an ideology of capitalism and communism. Capitalism by the United States, communism, Soviet Union. Why? Because those are the two nations that come out on top after World War II. And during Cold War, the majority of people who died in the Cold War are people in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Okay? The clientele wars, civil wars in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, funded by United States Central Intelligence Agency and also Soviet Union KGB. Let's be real here. When you look at the Korean War, well, it's a clientele war. United States or U.S. CIA operatives go in there, you fund South Korea, KGB fund the North. You have a civil war. Majority of Koreans are dying, and of course America as well. The Vietnam. You read about Ho Chi Minh, okay? Ho Chi Minh, North Vietnamese, he wanted to fight the French, get the French imperialists off of him. And he does. And if he'll use communism as part of his Vietnamese nationalism, oh, well, so be it. Well, the United States is going to fund South Vietnam, voila, civil war. Same thing in Africa. It deals with Central Africa, okay? This is what the Cold War, this is what it does. Because it's all about who has influence over whose economy in those nations. And the reason why I say that is that we have to go to Central and South Africa. For all those who have like little cell phone, you know, like mine right here, or your computer, or anything that's electronic, your cobalt, the things that make these things work come out of Central Africa. The African continent is the richest continent on the planet. And the reason why is because nations like Asia, United States, China, they cannot live without the oil and the diamonds and the gold and the cobalt and the minerals that comes out of Africa. To this very day, Central Africa, it has to be dismantled. It's disoriented. I mean, it has to be disorganized. And there's a reason why, you know. For this man, Patrice Lumumba, when you watch the documentary, The Assassination of Patrice Lumumba, he's the first Prime Minister of Congo. He formed the Congolese National Movement. Why? Because he's influenced by Kwame Nkrumah and Pan-Africanism. This idea of unifying this unification of people of Africa to fight off colonialism and decolonization. Well, he said, well, let me use Pan-Africanism to nationalize not only the Congo itself, but nationalize all the land, nationalize all the resources. Well, now these Western European nations don't have no access to that. Now, in the documentary, we see all this carnage going on in the Congo. Well, the question we have to ask is this: Was that carnage by design? And this is major. Because you had Joseph Mutete Shumbi, who was actually an ally to Portugal. He wants to separate from the Congo and the minerals with it to have it to be, he's been, he's propped up by Portugal. That's just the way it is. Then you have Joseph Mobutu, who was in his army. He's aided by the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, the two optional documentaries, Cuba and African Odyssey, in there's a CIA agent former CIA by the name of Larry Delvin, who talks about how plans of assassinating Patrice Lumumba, and now you can't come out and say that CIA killed Patrice Lumumba. You can't come out and say that. However, you can argue that they helped, because if you had Joseph Mobutu-ality, well, now there's something there. And Joseph Mobutu has been put in power. See, this is what you have called propped up African leaders. Just like propped up black leaders. You have propped up African leaders who interest is not with the people, is with the European power who put them in power. See, once you see the process of Pan-Africanism going into the Congo, all of a sudden it has to be destabilized. This is what's going on now. So Patrice Lumumba is murdered, and I don't have to go into that. This is Mutete Shumbi. This is John Mobutu. Mobutu assassinates him. What that does is this. It tells many African nations, especially in Central Africa, that we cannot negotiate for independence. We were going to have to fight we are going to have to fight the European for independence. And look, they just do. This is Amilcar Cabral of the Guinea-Bissau. He's fighting the Portugal. In comes Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, of course, leads the July 26th movement revolution in 1959. He also nationalized all the banks and all the American businesses, and he kicks the mob out. He really ran by the mob and the Central Intelligence Agency and U.S. senators, and he kicked them all out. Now he's fighting with the United States. Because technically, let's be real, U.S. imperialism was practiced upon Cuba. It just was. The Platt Amendment leads to the rise of Fidel Castro, and he has to fight it off. Well, now Fidel Castro has to fight assassination attempts by Central Intelligence, bombs and dynamite being put in his cigars. When he smokes it, it blows his head off. These are things he had to deal with. So now he's forming alliances with Central Africa and Asian nations to fight off colonialism and imperialism. He's aiding Central Africa. He's now sending his troops. He's now sending in Cuban army to train them in guerrilla warfare for independence. He gave them the training. Now he assisted Amilcar Cabral in fighting off the Portuguese, and that's major. Of course, Amilcar Cabral now been assassinated. This is, when we talk about, revolution, and this is it. For them, revolution has to come in the form of a gun. They have to fight off, this is what it is. The fall of Portugal is now important, because now you have Angola. Angola is now involved in the fighting against Portugal, and they defeat the Portuguese in 1974. There were 3 independent movements against the Portuguese government. I'll get into the other 2 later, but this is the one that was victorious. This is Augusto Neto. He was military trained, supported by Cuba, Fidel Castro, and the Soviet Union. The MPLA stands for the People Movement for the Liberation of Angola. After he declares independence, there's a civil war. You have to be destabilized. This is, again, and this is the MPLA victory, 1975. This is Augusto Neto, Fidel Castro. And look, folks do not want Fidel Castro or that type of influence in Central Africa. Plus, people still want their cobalt. They still want a lot of things. They still want their cobalt. They still want the minerals and everything else. And they're now about to look to these African leaders on the same level. You can't corrupt an Augusto Neto. So you got to get a leader in there and prop them up. You have propped up leaders. Well, that's just what you have. This one right here is Holden Roberta. He's not communist. He's not socialist. He's Christian. And he wants liberation for Angola as well. He formed the National Front for Liberation of Angola, founded in 1954, or maybe 64. My apologies, but let me check that out. But, well, I won't quiz you on the dates. He's getting military assistance from the CIA by way of Joseph Mobutu. Mobutu is like the middleman. He also getting it from France, Portugal, Great Britain. And it's by design to create conflict. It's the start of a civil war. Most of these civil wars also now include child soldiers. Why? Because now this is open warfare. You're going into other villages, going to other areas. And then you got women and children. You got to protect the women and children. Well, now you have to arm them. This is what it comes down to. Not only that, you're also now, of course, nowadays it's mostly corporations and global corporations now involved in those African nations for anti-warfare. But this is the beginning of it. See, this is the beginning of this. So this is another person, Jonas Savimbi, the National Union for Total Independence of Angola. Most of these guys just want to be in the heads of power. This one is very different because he's aided by South Africa, the Afrikaner government, the same one that is inflicting apartheid upon black South Africans. He also aided by the CIA, the United States, Great Britain, and Portugal. Here's the thing, and because, you know, look, there's no question that Israel has supported the white regime of South Africa and apartheid. They have. Now, what role do they have in the Civil War? I have no idea. I cannot make that argument. But you can say that they did support. Look, that's just true, and that's a major stand on Israel, on the state of Israel. But this is unique. This is the Civil War that's coming out. Now, what is South Africa's fear? Why are they involved in this? This is Angola. This is Zambia. This is Namibia and Botswana. This is South Africa. If independence for Angola spreads to Namibia and Botswana, there is no buffer. There is no buffer for white racism in South Africa, for that Afrikaner government. This is why they're now putting their troops and their military backing into Joseph Savimbi and into these folks. I mean, this is Botha and the clerk. These folks. Okay. Here's the thing. Angola, the MPLA, and the Cuban army defeats the South Africa in war. Moscow, Angola, well, the MPLA and Cuba defeat the South African government. We now have to ask questions about what really freed Nelson Mandela and what really ended apartheid. Yes, you had students here who protested against the corporations. Okay? Yes, you also had the spirit of the nation, the armed wing of the African National Congress. I didn't get into that. So much I want to get into. But this thing is very important. Cause let's be real. The first nation that Nelson Mandela visits is Cuba. And if you watch the first 5 minutes of Cuba and African Odyssey documentary, which is optional, you know, it was 3 hours long, I want you before that. If you watch it, you have Nelson Mandela saying, "Thank you for training my people, and we're going to come back to South Africa." After that, he was put on a terrorist watch list. I mean, you know, he's invited to the White House for dinner by George Bush and them guys, but he's on a terrorist watch list. He's on a terrorist watch list. But, you know, this is an area that's very important. And the reason why I show this is to show you that, hey, look, man, look, if black folks cannot be free until Africa is free. And let's just be real with that. I mean, you saw people who use tactics and ideology to say, look, if I can't get my independence through negotiations with these folks to recognize me on an equal level, well, then I just have to use armed revolutionary struggle and self-defense. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. Understand something. Patrice Lumumba and these African independent leadership, people of the Black Power movement here were looking towards them. Folks like Malcolm X and Kwame Ture were looking towards them as their inspiration for independence here. Next week will be your last week. You have your final exam. You will also have your final discussion board. We have to have a conversation about what happened in Minnesota and Baton Rouge. Learning about what